Shalom, shalom. Welcome back to Jerusalem. Welcome back to Zion. Good to be with you. I'm Michael Lawrence. And again, this week we are learning the weekly Torah portion, the Parashat Shavua. We are in the book of Shemot and the book of Exodus, the second Torah portion in the book of Exodus. And before we jump in, I wanted to touch on something very important. And that is to look for a moment at the generation in which we live. A time when we are connected almost 24/7 to the internet, and we are exposed to and able to see the world as it happens. It's remarkable. Now, there are dangers of this, and particularly to children, should they not be supervised during their time on the internet. There are many dangers and bad influences involved there. But one of the positives, if we're to pinpoint the positives of being an interconnected world today through the internet, it is that we see what is going on. And we're able to see travesties and cruelties and imprisonments and immoral behavior towards nations, towards communities, and towards individuals and to families. And unlike the time, say 70 years ago, when 6 million Jews were slaughtered in Europe during the Holocaust, during the Shoah, when we didn't have that kind of access immediately, today we can see when terrorism or extremism or racism or bigotry or all kinds of cruelty and immorality, we can see it happening, sadly. But we have that access through all kinds of social media platforms and beyond. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. We can identify and we can take action. And Dafka, actually, in this week's Torah portion, we see action taken to rescue a people imprisoned. God, in verse 5 of this week's parasha, we're talking chapter 6 of the book of Exodus at verse 5, he says, Ani shamati et na'akat b'nei Yisrael. I heard the groan, the calling out, the screaming of the children of Israel. And he calls on Moses, he appears to Moses, and he reminds Moses in verse 4 of chapter 6 of the covenant. El Avraham, El Yitzchak, ve'el Yaakov. The covenant he had with the ancestors, with the forefathers of the Jewish people and of the world. And God enters the world. He sees a people imprisoned. He hears them screaming out. And he teams up with Moses. He says, Moses, at verse 10 and 11, come, speak to Paro, speak to the king of Egypt. Come, speak to Paro, king of Egypt, that he send the children of Israel from his land. And what do we see in line 12, in verse 12 and 30 of this chapter 6? Moses is hesitant, but my lips are sealed. What can I do? The king of Egypt to listen to me? Chapter 7, verse 1, God says, this is a team game. You have your brother. He will be with you. He will be your spokesperson. You will go in there together and I will be with you. Play this game, Moses. Work with me here, Moses. We're going in to rescue a people. And what's fascinating about this week's Torah portion is that it's not only rescuing an imprisoned people, but it's taking them on a journey that will see a new set of laws, a new set of traditions being given to us and to the world at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, as they travel on the way to the land promised to them and to the forefathers, the land of Israel. We will see in this week's Torah portion 7 plagues, the first 7 plagues that are brought down on Egypt. And every time the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, his heart is hardened. And only next week, in the next Torah portion, when we see the final 3, does he finally let the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, go, only to pursue them. And all of them, of course, drown, the Egyptians, that is, the soldiers, in the Sea of Reeds as it splits. You know, it's fascinating. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, who passed away just recently, the former Chief Rabbi of the British Commonwealth, he finds this Torah portion extremely inspiring. He calls it a spine-tingling moment every time he reads this Torah portion each year. Why does he say that? He says because God entered history at this time. And he taught us something extremely important, and it's what I touched on in the beginning of this short session together. God entered history, says Jonathan Sacks, and he taught us that oppression and injustice is not ingrained into the human condition. Things can be different because we can be different. Things can be different because we can be different, says Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. He says that together with God, and this is what God showed us in this week's Parasha, in this week's portion, and next week, together with God, if we team up with God like Moses did and believe in him, then we can change the world and we can make history, not just be made by it. I want to repeat that and quote Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Together with God, we can change the world. We can make history and not just be made by it. And I think this is the lesson of the rescue of the Jewish people, of Bnei Israel from Egypt at that time. There is no room in this world today even more so today, when we can see what is going on in real time. There is no room in this world to accept imprisonment of peoples, injustices, cruelty, immorality. We have a deep moral obligation to stand and to overcome those challenges and stand together like Moshe and Aaron did, like Moses and Aaron, together with God, and take action. It's not acceptable to watch other people suffer. And we have been given a gift as such, that today we see the world 24/7 through the technology we have. It's not just about viewing. It's about viewing and understanding and standing to take action as required. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. May this be a strong message to all of us in these difficult times as we enter through 2021 and hope for the very, very best of years in health and safety, in moderation and stability. Shabbat Shalom.